Okay, this is a video of me re-recording the 11th nakshatra known as Purva Phalguni. This is a nakshatra that falls in between 13.20 degrees of that begins at 13.20 degrees of Leo all the way to 26.40 degrees of Leo. This is a nakshatra that is ruled by Venus. The deity that rules it is known as Bhaga, and the sexual animal associated with it is a female rat. And there's three symbolisms that's associated with this nakshatra. One is a hammock, one is the headboard of a bed, and the other one is a fireplace. And the reason I'm redoing this nakshatra is because I got deeper and better understanding of this nakshatra. I had to do deeper research that couldn't be found too much in books, and I had to just do some Googles and stuff. So now I got a deeper understanding of this nakshatra. Also, the Shakti of this nakshatra is the ability to procreate or union of polar opposites. And let's get into it, because I took a lot of notes down when it came to this nakshatra. So if you see me looking down at my phone a lot, that is why. I took down a lot of notes, so I hit everything on the head. So let's start with the symbolism of the rat. So the deity who is commonly portrayed to, be associated with a rat is Ganesha. Ganesha's form and vehicle of transportation is a rat. And the story of how he obtained the rat is stated that there was once this demon known as Gaja Mugasura who was transformed into a rat by Ganesha after this demon had made a wish that no weapon could defeat him, couldn't harm him. So Ganesha ends up breaking off his elephant tusk, and he ends up throwing his elephant tusk at this demon. And the demon, in order to duck Ganesha's elephant tusk that was about to hit him, he transformed. He shrunk into a rat, and it stated that Ganesha then sat on him, and he was no longer able to return back to his normal demon form. And it's also stated that in the process of Ganesha sitting on him while he was stuck in the form of a rat, that he ended up crushing his ego and stuff. And then I believe the rat wanted nothing else more to do than to just serve and be by the side of Ganesha versus dying and stuff. So that is how Ganesha obtained, the rat as a form of transportation. And it's another thing you can take about Ganesha's association with the rat, because if you think about it, the head, our head contains all the five senses. And if you know anything about Ganesha, which I will try not to get too long-winded with, is that that he was decapitated. His head was decapitated, and he ended up gaining an elephant's head after he was decapitated to replace his original head. And when you think about your head in general, your head is the only part of your body that contains all five of your senses. The nose for smelling, the ears for hearing, the tongue for tasting, the skin for feeling, and the eyes for seeing. All your senses is on your head. So with Ganesha being naturally associated with the South Node Ketu, because the South Node Ketu is a body without a head, and Ganesha was also headless at one point, you see that, there's this spiritual essence to Purva Phalguni. And I'm about to get deeper and explain the message that I'm struggling to try to convey. So think about a rat. And I took notes down on rats. Rats, apparently, they have to eat and gnaw on things to manage the length of their teeth, because their teeth apparently doesn't stop growing. It just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing and growing. So a rat always have to keep eating and chewing on something to sort of, gnaw down and trim their teeth. And if they don't properly trim their teeth, then they won't be able to eat properly or communicate properly, because their teeth will just become so long and they'll just grow in a bad way. So you see that by nature, in a sense, a rat is forced to have to be greedy. They're forced to have to be always moving their mouth, and they're forced to always have to consume something or chew on something. So for one, you can see addiction be associated with this nakshatra. And in the same way, and you can also see that a Purva Phalguni person can become very communicative. They can be very communicative, or they just love to eat things. They just love to eat and just eat stuff, or be very communicative. And in the same way that a rat has to keep chewing on things to manage the length of their teeth, humans naturally are very greedy. We are sort of, in a sense, naturally ruled by our senses. We're ruled by our desire to maybe eat stuff or to have sex. We're sort of like naturally become a slave to our bodies. We overeat when we don't need to eat, and we just naturally overconsume. We just overindulge in our senses very, very naturally. And overindulgence in anything can be negative, you know. I can't really come up with no examples, but the easiest targets is, eating. Overeating can get you, in trouble. Speaking and saying the wrong things out your mouth can get you in trouble. Making the wrong decisions with your sexual organs can get you in trouble. Hearing the wrong things, letting people get inside your head and feed negative information can sort of be damaging and get you in trouble. So you see, what this nakshatra shows is that with, his connection being with Ganesha and him being decapitated at one point, and the rat who always has to consume and has this overindulgence of stuff, you can see that a Purva Phalguni person, they could either be this overindulgent person, naturally like a rat, or they can rise above that overindulgence. Because think about it. Imagine if you lived life and you really maybe just didn't have like two of your senses. Let's say that you was someone who was maybe blind and deaf. You can't see or hear. Or hell, you can't see, hear, or even feel things. I was about to use an example of, imagine if you was born and you didn't have none of your senses. But if you was born and none of your senses worked, then you wouldn't even know that you was alive, which is sort of deep and spiritual in a sense too. But for the sake of the example and message that I'm trying to convey of the spiritual side of this nakshatra, is that imagine if you lived a life and you couldn't see, you couldn't hear, and you couldn't feel. The only two things you could do is smell stuff and taste stuff. But you can't feel nothing, you can't see nothing, and you can't hear nothing. Well, naturally, this would probably initially drive someone crazy. Probably naturally drive them crazy and make them want to kill themselves. But on the other side, if they can rise above this insanity, this feeling of insanity, they might be able to, enjoy the fruits and nectar of life in a spiritual sense, Because like I said, think about it. If you lost your sense of touch, then for one thing, sex would probably most definitely end, because you wouldn't be able to get aroused. You would find other things you would find deeper and more spiritual things and deeper meanings in life without you being ruled and controlled by your senses. And that's sort of what Ganesha rules and represents. Because Ganesha is a deity who is stated to be associated with astrology itself. Ganesha is known as like a remover of obstacles and whatnot. He's known to be very intelligent and clever. And like I said, long story short, because I'm stumbling over my words, but I hope y'all got the message I was trying to convey, is that there's more than life than just being ruled by your senses, being ruled by your pleasures, being ruled by your greed and addictions. You can see there's other deeper things and ways to enjoy life on a spiritual level, aside from just fulfilling your sensual pleasures and stuff. So you can see those two sides with Purva Phalguni. They can be very greedy and very addictive, or they can also become very spiritual. And there's way more examples of how this nakshatra can be very spiritual aside from very sexual, aside from this little story that I told you about Ganesha and the rats. one thing that you will see with this nakshatra is that even though the deity of this nakshatra is Bhaga, you can really associate the life of Arjuna with this nakshatra. Who is Arjuna? Arjuna is known as this great warrior in Hinduism, in their stories, such as the great epic story known as the Mahabharata, that war and stuff. And like I said, Arjuna is someone who's known to be a great warrior. And also, one of the alternate names of this nakshatra is Arjunis. And I believe Arjuna refers to himself, or mentions that one of his other names, or names that he identifies himself with, is Phalguna or Phalgunis. So you see Arjuna's association with Purva Phalguni nakshatra, and you see that Purva Phalguni's nakshatra associated with Arjuna, because I told you one of the alternate names of this nakshatra is Arjunis. And when I looked up what the hell does the name Arjun or Arjuna means, apparently Arjun or Arjuna, the name represents something that is white, bright, brilliant, and or intelligent. So at first I wanted to say then you could sort of take that and associate with this nakshatra as like some form of like purity associated with this nakshatra. But no, I wouldn't want to say that. I would rather say that, you know, this is probably a rather dazzling nakshatra. This is a rather mesmerizing nakshatra. And the reason I say that is naturally because of one of the alternate symbolisms of this nakshatra is a fireplace. And I'm going to go through all the symbolisms, but let's start with the fireplace since I'm speaking about it. So think about a fireplace. A fireplace is usually, you know, typically in a home. And just sitting in front of a fire in a fireplace in your home is just very cozy and comfortable and relaxing. So on one side, you see the sensual, comfortable aspect of Purva Phalguni through the symbolism of the fireplace. But also, you can also use the fireplace to maybe cook. You know, take some marshmallows and a stick and make some s'mores. Some roasted marshmallows or something. So you can also use a fireplace, the fire, to cook. And I told you about the rat, how I always had to chew and eat. So you can see that a Purva Phalguni person could really love to eat stuff and or be a good cook and or just love to play and be around fire. Another thing you would see from Purva Phalguni nakshatra person with the association of the fire is that these people could be very susceptible to burns, to be getting burnt by fire. They might have burn marks over their body or something. Another thing you'll see with a Purva Phalguni person is that they might really love to do rituals and offerings, which makes sense because the planet that rules this nakshatra is Venus. Venus is associated with Shukracharya, who is the guru and the advisor of the Asuras, the demons. And so you can also see that little occultic element, that occult element with Purva Phalguni. These people could dig, you know, when you do rituals and offerings and manifestations, candle is present, a fire is present. And what else can we take from this nakshatra just by saying that its association is with fire? Well, think about fire. Fire is naturally associated with the deity Agni. Agni rules Kritika nakshatra, which falls in between Aries and Taurus. And I believe it's stated that Agni is present wherever there is fire. And the depictions of Agni, at least from what I've read, is that he's always stated to be rather young or youthful, because fire itself is something that is young and eternal and youthful. Think about it. Think about the lifespan of a candle or the lifespan of a fire, and treat that lifespan and imagine that it was your baby or something. If you light a candle, depending on the type of candle you light, a candle might last for a few hours. Now imagine if you had a baby and that baby was only alive for a few hours or a day or two. No more than a week, less than a week. That baby was still a baby. That baby was still infant. So that's sort of fire. Think about it. Fire never lasts long. I mean, if your house burning out on fire, that probably feels like a long ass time, but fire never lasts long. So fire is born, it burns, and then it goes out. So fire, in a sense, is always youthful. So you see a very maybe energetic and youthful in nature to this nakshatra. People who might have this on their ascendant, they might just be very alluring and have a very youthful appearance. Because think about fire. Fire itself is very attractive and mesmerizing. You can stare at fire all day. It could just be mesmerizing. Just like you're a caveman looking at fire and stuff. It's very alluring and mesmerizing and hypnotic. A Purva Phalguni person, especially if this is like their ascendant, they might have this alluring, hypnotic, mesmerizing element in nature to them. And also, think about fire. The first zodiac sign is Aries. It's a cardinal sign, and it's a fire sign. The first nakshatra, therefore, is a fire sign and starts everything off. And also in Taittiriya Brahmana, is also stated that, or theorized that, Kritika nakshatra is actually the first nakshatra instead of Ashwini nakshatra, because Kritika nakshatra in this text of Taittiriya Brahmana, Kritika is mentioned first. And Kritika nakshatra is a nakshatra that is controlled by the sun. And when you hear about the beginning of the universe is stated to have been born and created from a big bang, an explosion. An explosion is sort of, associated with fire also, isn't it? So you see that fire is sort of like the beginning. So fire sort of deals with like the beginning of everything, the beginning of life, the beginning of the universe. There's sort of a theme of foremostness, a theme of initiativeness associated with fire. Think about it. Fire produces light. Fire produces light. And light is faster than sound. So you see this sense of cardinalness, this sense of leadership, this sense of initiativeness, this sense of alphaness associated with fire. So therefore, you can associate that alphaness, that number oneness, that leadership-ishness. You can associate those qualities with Purva Phalguni. And also, the tree that is associated with this nakshatra is the Palash tree. P-A-L-A-S-H. It's the Palash tree. And this tree is stated to be known as a fire tree or a flame tree. I want to make sure I get it correctly. Yes, it's stated that this tree is known as the flame of the forest, and it's stated to be a form of Agni. Now, you can connect this tree with the mythological story of the Khandava forest, which mythologically is a forest that was burned down by the fire god Agni. But you can tie that story with Arjuna and Krishna, because this is the story of the Khandava forest. It's stated that Agni, the fire god, wanted to consume this forest. He wanted to burn it. He wanted to eat. He wanted to burn and consume the forest. But there was a Naga, a serpent that lived in the forest. And apparently this serpent was friends and cool with Indra. And therefore Indra was protecting the forest because his friend lived there. And Indra is a rain god. So whenever Agni would produce his flames, Indra would come and put the flames out. So Agni goes to Arjuna and Krishna. Krishna is the 8th major incarnation of Vishnu, and a close and good friend of Arjuna. And like I said, Agni goes to these two and asks them to protect him and fight off Indra while he goes and consumes this forest. So therefore, that's what happens. And I believe in the process of Arjuna defending Agni and fighting Indra, that Agni ends up blessing Agni ends up blessing Arjuna with some divine weapons to help him fight off the to fight off Indra. And it's also stated that Arjuna is the son of Indra. And this will make sense, and I'll point out why that's very important very soon. But like I said, Krishna and Arjuna, they fight off Indra and his forces, so therefore Agni could eat and consume and burn the forest. And it's stated that Indra was very impressed and happy with his son Arjuna, that he was able to fight and stand up to him. And he said that he would bless Arjuna with some weaponry if he was with some divine weapons, under the condition that he would be able to please and gain favor and the attention of Shiva. So therefore, Arjuna went and did some penances, some austerities, which is like harsh forms and serious ways of like worshiping someone. But essentially, Arjuna prayed and meditated and worshipped Shiva until he could gain the attention of Shiva. And it's stated that while Arjuna was in the middle of worshiping Shiva and meditating and calling out to him and all that good stuff, that a wild boar appeared and came to Arjuna, and he ends up killing the boar. And a hunter appears, and there's a fight that breaks out between Arjuna and this hunter, because the hunter was like, hey, you stole my fight. I mean, you stole my kill. And then the two, they get into a fight. And it's stated that they fight for what I believe is several days. Or if not several days, they fight for a very long time. And it was during this midst of this very long fight that Arjuna revealed that Arjuna find out that, you know, this isn't no regular person that he's fighting. He comes to find out later that the person who he was fighting was no other than Shiva himself. Shiva wanted to test the strength and see how great and powerful of a warrior that Arjuna was. And it's stated that after he was and I believe that it's stated that after their fight between, you know, Shiva, as I was saying, after the fight with Shiva and Arjuna, it stated that he was blessed with weapons. He was blessed with weaponry from Kubera, who was a god of wealth, Yama, who was a god of death, and Varuna, who was the god of the oceans, and who was the original god of the Devas before Indra came in and took him from his spot and position. And it's stated that also Arjuna was invited to his father's realm, heaven, because Indra is not just a rain god. Indra is also the ruler and the king of the Devas, the benevolent gods, and he lives in heaven. But his heaven isn't like the typical heaven that you might imagine. It's a heaven where your sensual pleasures and senses could just be fulfilled and stuff. And it is in Indra's realm that is stated that Arjuna learned how to sing and dance. So from that little excerpt that I told you, with Arjuna being known as someone who is skilled with singing and dancing, you can see that with a Purva Phalguni nakshatra, a Purva Phalguni person could really love to sing, and it could really love to dance, which makes sense because this is a nakshatra that falls into Leo, and Leo rules the 5th house, and the 5th house can represent creative arts and hobbies and all those talents and stuff. So it's in this nakshatra that you can really see that a Leo person can have great skills with singing and dancing. And also, there's a political nature inside to this nakshatra. You can see that people in this nakshatra, they can be connected to people in positions of high power. Yeah, you can see people who have planets in this nakshatra, they can be connected and tied to people who are in positions in high places and stuff, you know. Why did I say that? Think about it. Arjuna's father is Indra. Indra is a rain god and king of the gods. Then Arjuna, he was blessed with divine weapons from these other godly people, Yama, Varuna, Agni, and Kubera, and he won over and impressed Shiva, who was a major god, a god of death and time and healing and all this good stuff. So you see that he bumps and runs into a bunch of divine figures. And then Arjuna, he was friends and cool with Krishna, who is the 8th major incarnation of Vishnu. And it was Krishna who, in the battlefield during the Mahabharata war, that ended up being Arjuna's charioteer. Because there was this big war apparently, and Krishna and then Arjuna came to Krishna and, you know, wanted him to be his charioteer, wanted him to be with him during this war. And Arjuna felt very conflicted about participating in this war, as he would be fighting against family and friends. And it was during this time of self-doubt that Krishna bestowed Arjuna with divine knowledge, and he revealed to him his Vishva Rupa form. Vishva Rupa means like his universal form. Krishna revealed to Arjuna that he is indeed actually Vishnu, that he is this great divine cosmic being, and that he is everything, and that everything is him, and that everyone is existing within his body, that the universe is part of his body, that the universe is him and stuff. And yeah, so you could take a lot from that. Arjuna, like I said, he's connected to people in high positions of power. So if you used to take that into the real world, a Purva Phalguni person could, like I said, just be cool with people who could be like managers and supervisors, political figures. They could be very well connected with people in offices and stuff, which makes sense because the 5th house, which is what Leo originally rules, represents political stuff. You know, because the sun, Leo, it represents the government. So you see that nature in this. You see that nature in this nakshatra, and you can see that you know, a Purva Phalguni person, they can be a great warrior, because Arjuna is known as someone who is a great warrior, or like one of the greatest warriors. So you can see in this nakshatra that there's this element of fierceness and aggression and skill with weaponry that can be associated with this nakshatra. So like I said, not only can these people be great dancers and great singers, very communicative, great eaters, great cooks, maybe have a fetish for being around fire and stuff, but these people can also beat your ass potentially. They have that anger to beat you, and they can also be well connected with people in positions of power, much like Arjuna was. These people, they might end up having trouble with it. They might have a complicated relationship with their father, because as I told you, Arjuna ended up fighting his father. He ended up fighting Indra. So these people might have a complicated relationship with their father. And also that Palash tree that I told you about, who was associated with the story that I told you of, the burning of the Khandava forest, it stated that that tree is a personification of Agni, or it's believed that that tree is a personification of Agni. And if you look at my Kritika video, you'll learn a great deal of Agni, but Agni is someone who was very sexual and also very lustful, and also he was, you know, his nakshatra is associated with like a fierce warrior and be able to be very sharp and critical. So long story short, because this is a nakshatra whose symbolism is associated with this theme of fire and the fireplace, there's this sense of, like I said, being number one, alphaness, leadership, and also fire is very youthful and alluring and mesmerizing. Purva Phalguni is all of those things that I just mentioned and stated. And also the bird associated with this nakshatra is an eagle. What do we know about eagles? Well, granted, it depends on the type of eagle you're looking up, but essentially, eagles is the bird that's that's associated with the United States of America. And from the little bit of research that I've done, it is illegal to sort of like even pick up the feather or collect the feather of an eagle. It's illegal to harm and hunt and kill an eagle in America, or at least specifically the bald eagle in America. The eagle is even present on American dollars. It's on our currency and stuff. You know? So the eagle has political backing behind it. The eagle is associated with, the president and political figures. It's on our money. At least in America, it's on our money. The eagle is the eagle. It sounds like I'm saying ego. The eagle is protected by the government. So with this nakshatra being associated with an eagle, that further cements that the Purva Phalguni person can have protection from the government, and or depending on a planet that's in Purva Phalguni and a planet that's in Purva Phalguni and the house it rules, and or what's aspecting the planet in Purva Phalguni, you can see that these people can either be a friend of the government and gain protection from the government, or they could be an enemy of the government. They could get into a lot of trouble with the government, potentially. So it depends on a person's chart that shows which side of the coin, whether you're benefiting from the government or if you're in detriment from the government. But you see that theme. It's stated that an eagle, typically, one of the ways that they go and hunt and kill food is that they grab their prey up with their claws and fly really, really high, and then they drop their prey. And then their prey dies from the fall, and then they eat. So what can we take from that in a symbolic, practical sense? We can see that a Purva Phalguni potentially has the power to maybe ascend other people, lift them up, put them on a platform. But then they also got the power to knock someone down. They can promote you, and they can also knock you down. Or you, the Purva Phalguni person, you could become the prey. You could become the person who could be very vulnerable and susceptible to being, elevated and promoted in your life. And then the same person who promotes and elevates you, they can also drop you. It's stated that an eagle will really much, they'll stop any and everything to tend to their nest. If their nest is messed up, they'll stop their usual routines and activities and habits to make sure that their nest is taken care of. So you can see that for a Purva Phalguni person, maybe their home or their personal possessions and their wealth is very much so important to them, and they will stop everything if they don't feel secure within their home, if they don't feel secure financially, and if they don't feel secure with their material possessions. They will stop everything to go and secure their land. They'll probably transform into Arjuna. They'll transform into this great warrior to secure their land, just like a warrior might, fight for their land, fight for their property. You will be someone who will fight for your possessions, your source of income, your home, or whatever, and make sure that it is straight and all together. We can see that with a Purva Phalguni person. Also, it stated that Arjuna, when he was, in his father's realm, that this woman known as Urvashi, who is known as who are basically Asperas, and then don't quote me on exactly what an Aspera is. I don't remember. I don't want to completely mislead you, but to my understanding, these are basically the people who are like courtesans, divine little courtesans or whatever, who want to, maybe entice you to have sex like a siren. But this alien, this deity, whoever, Urvashi, goes to Arjuna and is attracted to him and wants to have sex. But Arjuna turns down Urvashi for whatever reason. He turns Urvashi down because, according to my notes, as I look at them, it stated that he viewed this woman as his mother. Even though she wasn't his mother, he viewed her as his mother, and he turned her down. She felt insulted, and she cursed him to be a eunuch, which means someone to be, castrated or to have low sexual desires. And his father, Indra, finds out about this, and he gets her to modify the curse. So now he's not permanently, low sex drive, low libido, or castrated. And instead, he's only what they call a eunuch for a year. So I don't know how you might be able to apply that into real life, but you might see that you might suffer, unfortunately, maybe some type of consequences where you turn down a woman's sexual advances. Because we see that with with Arjuna, he turned down a woman's sexual advances, and then he just lost like his sexual drive, or he had like some sexual organ malfunctions or whatever. So maybe something along that lines might happen to a Purva Phalguni person. Who knows? There would need to be like a large scale study of Purva Phalguni people who turn down the sexual advances of people, and we would have to see did they lose their sexual drive, or did they contract maybe some sexual disease, or did something happen to their sexual organs, or whatever. Now I'm looking at my notes to make sure that I am not missing nothing when it comes to this nakshatra. So give me a moment. So let's talk about the Shakti. The Shakti, the energy, the ability of this nakshatra. It's the ability to unite polar opposites and to procreate. Now, I think y'all already understand pretty well enough that this is a sexual nakshatra. So I don't need to put emphasis on the one side of this nakshatra that deals with procreation. But let's instead deal with the other ability, which is the ability to unite polar opposites. The union of polar opposites and bringing things together. Naturally, you might think about marriage. You might think about a boy and a girl, or a boy and a boy, or a girl and a girl coming together. But think about it. Let's think a little bit deeper. On a more different practical sense, I told you that this nakshatra is associated with people who are in leadership and many well-connected political positions. So, let's say that you're like some, political figure. I'm not really good and knowledgeable with the political system and the judiciary system, so forgive my ignorance, but let's say you're like some secretary or whatever, or you're just someone who's in a position of power, and you have to resolve the differences between two parties. You might have to resolve the differences between two warring factions, two warring natures, and by resolving the conflicts between these two warring factions and nations or people, you're essentially uniting two opposing people and bringing them together. So there's different, you can see something to that effect be of this nakshatra. People who can sort of work out problems and conflicts between people. So you might be able to see like some maybe relationship or marriage counselor with this nakshatra, or some type of advisor with this nakshatra, just resolving the conflicts and differences between two people and bringing them together. And or aside from that, and aside from an obvious sexual possibility, which is sexual union, you can see that these people could want to establish maybe a union with God, a union with a higher power. And like I said, with this nakshatra's association with fire, you can see that these people can potentially use that fire for rituals and manifestation. And as I told you, with Arjuna, he was friends with Krishna. Krishna was not only like his friend, but he also viewed Krishna as like his guru, his divine guru. And it was Krishna who gave him knowledge, which is which can be found in a spiritual text or story known as the Bhagavad Gita, which details the great conversation that Krishna reveals to Arjuna on the battlefield. So, and also Arjuna, as I've told you, he did severe penances and prayers and meditations and or rituals to gain the attention of Shiva. So Arjuna has this spiritual element, this spiritual discipline to him. So you can see a pinch of spiritual discipline be associated with Purva Phalguni natives. And back to that Shakti of the union of polar opposites, they could want to unite themselves with a higher power. That's one possibility that you can see with this nakshatra. And also the name Bhaga. Bhaga, if I didn't mention it already, he's a god of wealth. But Bhaga sort of is very similar to the word Bhakti. Bhakti. And Bhakti means like devotion, or like a divine love, and a divine union. To be the Bhakt of something, or Bhakti just represents loyalty and devotion. People of this nakshatra, they can be very devoted to something, which could range and be synonymous with addiction. But these people, they could be very devoted to a god, to their belief system. They could be devoted to something. They could just be, there's many different examples, but I'm taking this on a spiritual direction. But they can be very devoted, just really pray every day, and they can do it fiercely. They can speak with energy. They can speak with vigor when they pray. Everything about this nakshatra could probably be very energizing too. They can do things with energy and valor. But anyway, back to the spiritual side, like I said, they could just be very devoted and loyal and dedicated to their spiritual routines and their practices. And they could just really want to develop this union with the other side. That's one way that you can look at the union of polar opposites, which is the ability, the Shakti, the energy of this nakshatra. Also, the symbolisms, as I already told you, was a fireplace. With the other two symbolisms associated with this nakshatra is a hammock and the headboard of a bed. Now, there isn't too much I can take from the symbolism of a hammock, because essentially a hammock is like, that little swing that's like tied to a tree, and you're just laying down on it and you're just relaxing and stuff. So the hammock is more so symbolic as like a place of relaxation, going with the flow, unwinding. Bhaga is known as a deity who's sort of associated with not only wealth, but associated with like partying too, from what I've looked up to my little bit of understanding. So this is a very diverse nakshatra. It can be associated with fighting and warriors. It can be associated with singing and dancing. It can be associated with cooking and eating and addiction. It can be associated with being connected with people in political positions of power. It can be associated with divine devotion and stuff. So this is a very multifaceted nakshatra. But like I said, when it comes to the hammock, it's just, a place of relaxation. So you see that relaxing, cooling, sensual pleasure with this nakshatra. And the headboard of a bed, well, it doesn't really get, that's pretty simple and straightforward too. Think about the headboard. Think about the area of the bed where your upper body is, where you rest and lay your head at, In your bed, you can be all very intimate and private and emotional and vulnerable with your romantic partner, with your spouse. So you see that a Purva Phalguni person, they can be very intimate, very sensual, very great at sweet talking. They can have a real skilled and sweet way of speaking and communicating with people and with their spouse. They can be just very skilled with their tongue, with the words of their mouth when they speak to someone, but especially their lover. Their skilled and slick way of speaking, whether it's through lying or just whatever, can get them connected to positions of high power. These people might be vulnerable and susceptible to having maybe sexual relations with their bosses or with people in positions of power, And that's probably how they can gain favor. And or depending on the condition of the planet who is in Purva Phalguni, they can probably get into a lot of trouble if maybe sexual scandals and relations with someone in a position of power within a government or within a work environment gets out or something. And also within a bedroom, because it's a headboard, which is like the symbolism of this nakshatra. And a bed is in a bedroom. And a bedroom could be a place where it's very sacred, Within a bedroom, you can have intimate, private conversations with your lover about your kids, about your life, that you might not want to leave the four walls of your room. So these people could probably be real skilled and artful when it comes to meetings and having private conversations. And they could probably win and charm and have sexual relationships with the people that they're doing business and having serious conversations with, or the people who are in positions of power. And another thing, back to the demon who was a rat. The demon who got transformed into a rat and was the rod of Ganesha. Before he became a rat, the reasons that he had to be dealt with is because he had the wish fulfilled that no weapon could harm him, that no weapon could kill him. So he felt very egotistical. He felt very confident. He felt untouchable. So One thing you can see with a Purva Phalguni person is that they can embody that nature. They can feel invincible. They can feel untouchable. That like no one can fuck with them. No one can hurt them. So that's one thing that a Purva Phalguni person can need to watch out for. They can feel as though that they are invincible and that no one can hurt them, that no one can stop them, that they are just... But then one day someone might be like Ganesha and someone might humble them and make them bow, in a sense. So that's one thing to watch out for a Purva Phalguni person. If you have these planets in Purva Phalguni, you might feel that no one can touch you, that no one can fuck with you, that you're untouchable. And I'm looking at my notes to make sure that I am not missing anything else that is associated with this nakshatra. Another thing you will see with this nakshatra is that aside from them loving food, they would specifically love fried, oily, and salty food. Don't ask me why I said those specifically, because I took them down as notes, and I had these notes in my phone for a while, and I didn't write down specifically why I said those things. So yeah, Purva Phalguni person might specifically love fried, oily, and salty foods. And the other few things I have to say about this nakshatra lastly comes from a book, which is a good book for y'all to understand and learn nakshatras too. This book, a book by Victakara, known as The 27 Stars and the 27 Gods. Go follow him on YouTube. But in his video of explaining Purva Phalguni, and in his book, he points out something great that highlights the traits of Purva Phalguni beautifully. So, Bhaga, who is the deity of this nakshatra, he has children, he has sons, he has daughters, and he has a wife. But what Victakara did, he broke down the meaning of the names of his children and of his wife. And when he broke down the names and the meanings of Bhaga's children and his wife, they really further express the qualities in nature of this nakshatra. So, what do we know about his sons? Let's start with the name of his sons. One of them's name is Mahiman, which apparently means greatness, majesty, hugeness. The second son is known as Vibhu, which means solid, penetrating, and effective. And his last son is known as Prabhu, which is powerful, capable, and enduring. These traits that his sons, by taking the name of his sons and seeing what the name of those sons mean, this nakshatra sort of in a way teaches you the way or the things that a man should be, or the things that a man needs in order to please and keep his spouse happy. And I'll say them again: greatness, majesty, hugeness, solid, penetrating, effective, powerful, capable, and enduring. Now, obviously, you can take this into a real sexual direction, that it would probably be idealistically good if your sexual organ was huge and solid and penetrating and powerful, and that you yourself was be able to be very enduring sexually. But also you can take that into a muscular sense, a macho sense, that you yourself should be a huge guy, a muscular guy who should radiate majesticness and greatness, and you should be a very solid guy, not just in muscle but in the meaning and in presence. And you should be very powerful and providing and capable. Those are like some traits that are probably really idealistic or favorable for a man to have when it comes to him approaching a woman or being with a woman. And then the name of his three daughters are Surata, Varahora, and Asis. And apparently the meaning of those names mean dedication, virtue, and compliance, beauty, mounting, and attractive hips, desire, and fulfillment. So we can see that another nature of this nakshatra, and or what is sort of being implied that a woman should be towards her spouse, towards the person that she wishes to attract and be with, is that she should be dedicated. She should be virtuous. So she should have good morals and qualities. And she should be compliant. She should be submissive and listen to her spouse, listen to her man. And she should also be beautiful. And then it says mounting. What does that mean? She should be able to sexually please her man. She should be able to ride his dick, his sexual organ or whatever. I'm being blunt, but I don't care. And she should have very attractive hips, very attractive waist, And then it says desire and fulfillment. The woman should be able to fulfill her husband's desires. She should be able to fulfill him. And then, last but not least, the name of Bhaga's wife is Siddhi. And it stated that Siddhi, which is Siddhi, means perfection, unusual skill, and dexterity. But also when I Googled the definition and meaning of the word Siddhi, it is associated with knowledge, accomplishment, attainment, success. And also the fifth house is also a house that's known as, that's associated with knowledge. Why did I mention the fifth house if you wasn't paying attention? Because this is a nakshatra that falls in the sign of Leo, and Leo originally rules the fifth house. And if you count 5 places from Leo, the fifth house, 5 places from the fifth house, you get the fifth house, the sixth house, the seventh house, the eighth house, and the ninth house. And what is the ninth house associated with? The ninth house is associated with teachers, mentors, gurus, education. So 5 places from the fifth house is the ninth house, and it's sort of viewed that the ninth house is the higher version of the fifth house. And 9 places from the ninth house will land you in the fifth house. Because if the ninth house is the teacher, the fifth house is the students. And the fifth house is also associated with children, and children can sort of be your students. And it's also just sort of stated and associated that the fifth house is like associated with maybe the type of education that you might go and pursue and learn. So with Bhaga being a nakshatra that falls into Leo, and his wife name being Siddhi, and Siddhi meaning knowledge, accomplishment, attainment, or success, we can see that it is sort of stated that a man's wife should be maybe really rather intelligent, and or should be able to lead him, or like through marriage, through union, the spouse should be able to lead you to, like, you know, spiritual enlightenment, or connect you to like a higher power, connect you to a higher divinity in a sense. Which sort of makes sense, because now I'm getting all theoretical and philosophical down, so y'all can just sort of tune this out. I'm about to go on a rant, but it sort of makes sense because the D9 Navamsha chart is sort of like an expansion of the ninth house. But we know that the D9 Navamsha chart is essentially a chart that represents who we become as we get older, and it's a chart that represents marriage. It's a chart that shows who we become as we get older and signifies if we're capable of getting married or not. And it might initially make you wonder, why is a chart that is essentially an expansion of the ninth house associated with if we get married or not? And one of my theories, or one of the theories that I've sort of heard, but I can't really trace a direct source, is that, you know, ideally, or maybe in ancient times, a spouse was sort of maybe chosen, or one of the attributes that was looked at when it came to maybe finding a spouse was maybe how intelligent and competent that person was. Or maybe in some ancient time, ideally, it was looked at that a spouse looked and hoped that a spouse could connect you to a higher power, a higher divinity. Which sort of makes sense, because depending on the two people who get married or get together, a person might have never went to church or never had no faith or religion until they got with a girl. And then through that girl, they start going to church frequently. They start worshiping a divinity frequently because that's what she wants. Or a person could have been really into the church, really into God before they got into a relationship. But then they get together with someone, and that person takes them away from a divinity, takes them away from worshiping a higher power. So that's the end of my little rant. Make sure I'm not missing nothing else. But also, it stated that the word Bhaga means, according to his book, like I said, he did a great job in his book when it came specifically to this chapter, in my opinion, but when it came to this nakshatra. But according to him, the word Bhaga means a patron, gracious, generous, good fortune, prosperity, happiness, beauty and loveliness, love, lust, and vulva. And the vulva is obviously associated with the vagina, which highlights yet again the sensual sexual nature of this nakshatra. But the last thing I gotta say about this nakshatra, which just further reiterates that this is a nakshatra that can be associated with people maybe having eye issues and maybe suffering burns, is that this story is associated with this tale known as the story of the Great Yagna or whatever. So, long story short, there's this deity known as Daksha, who is like known as this deity, this god of like rituals and stuff. And his daughter, his youngest daughter, was known as Sati, who was the wife of Shiva. And Daksha didn't approve of his daughter being with Shiva. He didn't like Shiva. But anyway, he was holding this great big ritual. And all these other gods and deities was invited. And Sati wasn't invited, and she wanted to go. Shiva said that they shouldn't go because they're not welcome. But she wanted to go anyway. So she goes to this ritual and sees her father. And her father is talking bad about her and her husband in front of everybody. Sati becomes overwhelmed with depression and sadness, and she jumps into the sacrificial fire and commits suicide. She kills herself. And Shiva finds out. Shiva gets mad, and Shiva rips off the head of Daksha, throws it into the fire. I believe he messes up several people at the party. I said the party, at the ritual. He cuts one person's hands off, knocks one person's teeth. But when it came to Bhaga, who was present at this event, it stated that he took Bhaga's eyes out, or he burned him and blinded him. Some to the extent, but his eyes got jacked up. So you see from that story that a Purva Phalguni person, they have issues with their eyes. Or they might suffer burns. Or they might find themselves getting injured a lot. They might find that when they're in the presence of fire, whether they're cooking or whether they're at a party, a cookout, they can be very susceptible and vulnerable to injuries, maybe to the eye, or to getting burned, or just to some type of conflict. So maybe the suggestion of a Purva Phalguni person is to be careful of the company that they keep in the presence of fire, or when they go into parties and cookouts and stuff, and that they should not be maybe the initiator of conflict and violence in the presence of fire or a cookout or something, or in a kitchen, because they're more likely to get injured and hurt than anyone else. And I believe that is all that I have to say in regards to this nakshatra. I am making sure that I am not missing nothing, because I believe now I hit the nail on the head when it came to this nakshatra versus my initial interpretation with this nakshatra. So yes, that is it. That's all I have to say about this nakshatra. I hope that this nakshatra gave you great clarity and insight on yourself if you're someone who have a Purva Phalguni ascendant or prominent planets who fall within Purva Phalguni. If this resonated for you, like the video, comment, subscribe. If you're interested in me interpreting your birth chart, go click the About Me section on my YouTube and click the link there and book a reading. But until then, thank you for watching. Okay, so I forgot two more things in regards to Purva Phalguni. One is that it was stated that I believe Arjuna has been exiled at least twice. And also because of the symbolism of this nakshatra being the headboard of a bed. One thing that you can see this nakshatra, that potentially when it comes to the 10th house and the 10th floor, these people could like to work from home. Or they could maybe prefer and enjoy like a comfortable job. A job where it's maybe they're making good money, but they don't got to work too hard. They're comfortable. Or they might just, like I said, do remote work. And because of Arjuna in his life having been exiled, you can see that these people, as much as they might have this party animal nature to them, they could also have a different polar opposite side of them, where they just need to retreat, where they just need to spend some time alone and exile and stuff. But yeah, the main thing I want to say is that you can see that these people could, also have a slight bit of introvertedness to them, and they could love to work from home and do remote work. But now, hopefully, I'm done. And thanks for watching.